Great. All right, and we may have a few people filtering in as we get going, but thanks to everyone for introducing yourself. It's great to see people from all over here. And so C is here, and she specializes in integrating, designing, and instructing Native American cultural values in program curriculum. And she's worked with formal and informal programs, and I see there's people here who are involved in both formal and informal education. So she has experience in both. And right now she's a Native Environmental Science faculty at Northwest Indian College, the Nez Perce site. So I will let her take it from here.
Cool. Thank you for the introduction and welcome everybody. It's good to see familiar names and faces and some of the new names on there. I'm looking forward to hopefully connecting in the future and seeing what good work we can do together. So to start this out, cultural values in the classroom, we always want to look at and see why do we actually need to be thinking about cultural values in the classroom. So I actually just happened to see this article come across my Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and I had seen, we had been talking about doing this webcast, and I thought, this is so relevant to what I want to talk about. And I looked up the article, and it was from 2016. So interesting enough, these are kind of some snippets that I pulled out of it. There's the link there if you want to read the whole article. But this first paragraph talks about character education in the public school system. And the first note there, according to the study, 57% of teens stated that successful people do what they have to do to win, even if it involves cheating. 24% believe it's okay to threaten or hit someone when angry. 31% believe physical violence is a big problem. 52% reported cheating at least once on an exam. And 49 students reported being bullied or harassed. And so with those statistics, it's definitely alarming that our youth think these things are okay or recognize the prevalence in our school system. The second paragraph is a teacher's kind of take on this. And teaching character education in school is actually unavoidable. Everything the school chooses to do or not to do in terms of curriculum choices. And so I really think that's something to just keep in the back of your head. Maybe you're saying to yourself, or other educators in your field are saying, well, we don't teach cultural values in our classroom. Well, by not doing that, you're reinforcing this idea that it's not important. It's not something that we need as a society. So I just wanted to point those out. Again, you can find that link to the entire article, and there's a lot of great studies out there actually on moral compasses of students and building character in the classroom. So that's kind of where we're at to start. Go ahead and go to the next one. But what are cultural values? And so I've been working in education, I figured today 9 years, which seems crazy. But I've always had this complex of coming up with a specific definition. So we narrowed it down to this one here. Cultural values are the core principles and ideals upon which an entire community exists. This is made up of several parts, including the customs, or the traditions and rituals, and the values, or the beliefs, and the culture, which is the group's guiding values. And so when we think about the cultural values, and this is exactly what I do with my students too, I say, what cultural values are important to you? And what do those values look like in your community, family, and school? And so tonight, you guys have the opportunity to be just like my students. And so we'll get you into some breakout rooms. Leah's gonna help situate that. And you guys will think about what values, what cultural values are important to you, and what do those values look like in your community, family, and school.
And I'll put you in breakout rooms, and then I'll be broadcasting the prompt again once you're in your rooms. So you'll see an invitation in just a moment.
I really enjoyed the folks that were in my breakout group. We had some discussion about what does cultural values mean when you have various cultures in the same classroom. and what does that look like? So let's just get on to the next slide, and I think we'll kind of address some of those topics. So for me, I'm Nimiipuu, Nez Perce. Our tribal homelands span throughout the Northwest traditionally and still today. So I like to point that out, that we still, fish along the Columbia River and gather in various mountains throughout the Northwest our traditional berries and roots. And for me, this is where a lot of my foundations came from. In the left hand there at the top, you see my great-great-grandmother, Lizzie Cayuse. And down there at the bottom, you see my great-great-great-grandfather, Pile of Clouds. And when I think about, obviously in this time there were cameras. So I try to think back to my ancestors even before that, pre-colonial ancestors, and the cultural values that were instilled and passed down from generation to generation through our stories, through our traditions of hunting and gathering, our ceremonies, our songs, our language. These are the types of foundations I like to really try and base my life on. And go ahead and go to the next slide. But as you know, we're in today's modern society, and we don't live in black and white images anymore, or grayscale or sepia tone. So this is my life, my nephew fishing, my little brother claiming that to be his deer that he got, and a picture, a child's rendition of our creation story, that Heart of the Monster there at the top, where Coyote had gone and sacrificed himself and gone into defeat a monster that had eaten all the other animals, and went inside and cut the heart out of the monster. And from that monster, the body that lay there, he spread parts all across the world, creating the Indigenous people. And what was left was the heart, which still lays about an hour up the river from us on our homelands. And the heart of the monster is where the blood from that heart is where the Nez Perce, the Nimiipuu, come from. And so there's a lot of lessons in that story, which is, can be told in the 30 seconds I just took, or like 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks, however long, because there's so many side stories related to it. I'm not sure, Leah, if you can play that video there. Great. I'm just going to let this play. All right, you can play it again, and now this time I'm going to talk during it. But that's a video of me right now, well, not right now, but during this time of year where we're digging coquite or biscuit root. And, the tool I'm using is based on a traditional tool called a tukus that was made from wood and antlers. I'm digging up the root and replanting the seeds. And once I replant the seeds, I push the ground back down, and you can barely see a disturbance. And when I think about foundations in culture, the root of who we are comes from the culture that we're raised in. And I recorded that video for no particular reason. I thought it would be cool. And every time I watch it, I learn something still. I learn something that I can relate it back to my life. And in almost every presentation I give, it has some sort of context. And so in the context of our foundations, we as people are also the roots for the next generation. So we'll be planting these seeds in the next generation. And if it's without character or values, then we really are going to be concerned about what the future looks like. And so we may be science educators, we may be formal or informal educators, but I think it's our responsibility as people and people in our society to instill some sort of values in our students. And for me, I've found that science is a great avenue to do that. So especially with my foundations in a culture that is absolutely based in environmental interactions and ecosystem interactions. Go ahead and go to the next slide. All right. So this is a cultural iceberg. Those in my breakout session, this is the ones that I was referring to. So on the surface, many of us think, oh, culture, that's what people wear and the music they listen to and their dance and language. But really that's just the surface. That's just the top of the iceberg. And many of us know that what's on the surface of an iceberg is only 10%. And 90% is actually underneath the surface where we can't see. And so if you look on the left-hand side, it says the surface culture are those things I just alluded to. And below the surface, there's the shallow culture, and then there's the deep culture. And so when you read down that list, it kind of gets into deeper culture. So at the top, we have eye contact, which was something we talked about in ours. That's a shallow culture. Ideals of child rearing, theory of disease, tone of voice. And as you move down, the tolerance, which is another cultural value we talked about, tolerance of physical pain, definition of obscenities, attitudes towards dependence, problem-solving roles in relation to age, sex, class, occupation, kinship. And so as you move further down that list, we're getting deeper into the culture and things that, these are all things to be considering throughout the iceberg. It would be, I guess, doing some work is better than doing none. And so if you only are addressing the surface, you are doing some work, and that's better than none. But I think to really be effective and instill things within our youth, it's, to empower their cultural identity and to give them the space and place in the curriculum to express themselves and communicate their ideas of notions of leadership or notions of adolescence or definitions of insanity. And some of those topics might be pretty deep for the primary students, but I guarantee I work a lot with middle and high school students. And these are things they're thinking about, that they can recognize, and they appreciate when adults can have honest conversations with them about it and recognize their own questions and their own beliefs about something. And that's because it's founded in the culture of their house, of their friends, and then within the school walls. Believe it or not, that has so much to do with our children's perceptions of what is society norms. Okay, can you go to the next one? So getting back to cultural values, this is a list that I've developed over the last probably more or less 6 years. I've continued to add to it. And for summer camps that I do, we do a big brainstorming session at the beginning. What are cultural values? And we get a whole web of cultural values that are listed. I do this with adults as well. And then from that, as an educator, I go in and pull from the cultural values that my students told me are important to them and tie those to lessons. So if you look at the sample list, a couple of the ones that I think I use multiple times throughout curriculum is respect, healing, protection. I'm not sure, I'm not seeing protection on there. Healing and protection I usually hold together. Resilience and balance and interconnectedness. Those are kind of the top ones that I use because, in our breakout session, I said respect, I think, is at the core of all of my cultural values. Not to say that it's the most important, because I think they're all very much integral, but it's one that I seem to rely upon most in my life and put kind of at the forefront of things that I do. So that's the sample list. Like Leah said, you'll have these slides available, and if it's something you want to use or reference, what I have had in the past is have it printed out and send home with teachers, and they put it right at their desk so they can pull from it readily. Go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to walk you through kind of what I use to bring these cultural values into the classroom. Or into the informal education environment. Because believe me, we use it at summer camp, and I don't think we sit in the classroom one single day besides to eat in the mess hall. So the protocol that I've developed over the years that I've found to be successful is to introduce the cultural value at the very beginning and introduce it with the lesson plan of the day. I found that students really like to know, what are we doing? What are we doing? You know, they'll be asking you 3 days in advance, what are we doing on Saturday, or what are we doing on Friday? Like, okay, let's talk about what are we going to do on Friday? And giving them that cultural value is something they can start thinking about ahead of time, but also with a theme, so they can already start making those associations in their mind. Like, what does lamprey and resilience really have to do with each other? The second step, brainstorm information about the cultural value and theme. So kind of how I just described that brainstorming activity. And I'll go through each of these in depth. 3, provide a dictionary definition and an explanation of the cultural value. And I want to point out here that's really important to first honor your students and their knowledge that they come with by the brainstorming their information. And then 2, provide them with a definition, an explanation, because their knowledge, their perspective is just as valuable, and we want to honor that and recognize that. So it's those 2, I would say, are pertinent to be in that order. 3, give reflection prompt for the cultural value. Before you start diving into, for some of my classes, dissection, ask them, what does this mean to you? Number 5, throughout the lesson plan, make sure you emphasize how the cultural value is relevant. So it's really important to hit them with it at the beginning, introduce it throughout. For me, I found like when there might be a behavioral issue inching up to the surface, I say, now remember, we're all going to be really respectful today in class, especially when we're doing dissections on something, because we need to be respectful to our relative. And that usually, de-escalates any kind of behavioral problems. And then I send that home with parents too, so they can talk to their children about respect or whatever it may be. Throughout the lesson plan, okay, number 6, create the assessment to include thoughts, feelings, and interpretations of the cultural value relevance. And so you don't want to directly say, this is how it's related. Let them synthesize that on their own. So we'll go through each of these individually and get an idea of how I use them. All right, so where to start? The preparation. One, oops, is a little bit cut off, but that's okay. Review the lesson plan and select an associated cultural value. You can definitely, from the list that I gave, there's, you can usually pick a handful that are related. So maybe look at a couple lesson plans out and see which ones might fit best. I try not to use the same one because I think there's plenty to learn, and maybe they don't need to respect 3 times in a quarter, but throughout the year, they can learn respect 3 times throughout each quarter. And so you want to do your research as an educator ahead of time, research the definition, the dictionary definition, and then an explanation of cultural values. And so below, NEA Family Center, which is based in Portland, they provide this on their website, which is up at the top right corner, values and definitions of what they encompass at their center. And so respect is at the very top. And respect at NEA means we believe in individual responsibility to show love and acceptance and kindness to everyone. And so this list is actually a little bit longer. I cut it just for our slide. So that's one resource you can use in thinking about cultural values and the definitions. So go ahead and go to the next slide. They might be out of order a little bit. But when you introduce the cultural value and the lesson plan theme, so here's an example of some that I've used in the past 4 years or so, maybe. So for Crit Fix, Salmon Camp, lamprey and life cycle and dissections was something we did. And we talked about resilience. And for those who don't know, lamprey are older than the dinosaurs. So to me, like, they are definitely a resilient species. And that's something once you start teaching the youth or whoever it may be, I teach this to adults as well, the life cycle and the history of lamprey and the story of lamprey. Resilience is something that is very prominent in their the fabric of their being. And so that's one association there. And the Roots to Wings program, which is based out of Yakima, with the Yakima Nation and a couple of the schools in the area. It's a medical school program for middle and high school students. And so we're looking at pharmacy, medications, surgical procedures, but our cultural value is protection and healing. So we're partnered with med students and doctors, and we're talking about protection and healing, which seems very well relevant for their field. And then we think about it from a cultural perspective. What does that mean as Native Americans? What does that mean as Hispanic or Mexican? And the students bring what they think protection and healing means. The summer program for Yakima students, learning in brain trauma, we learned about patience. Another program or another example was neuroscience and pathways in the brain. And we talked about the red road or the Indigenous lifestyle, staying on the good path. Other people call it, non-Indigenous folks call it the good path. Currently at Northwest Indian College, I bring this into, like I said, all the way up to my adults. I'm teaching our relatives, our animal biology class, and this week we're teaching about arthropods, so arachnids, insects, crustaceans, and we learned teachings from butterfly, dragonfly, ant, and spider. And I'm sitting here learning with my students, which I guarantee if you adapt this model to your classroom, you will learn from the students. You will have a new appreciation for patience, or a new appreciation for what the spider is teaching us as individuals. It's really, it builds this relationship, I think, with your students that, again, honors their perspectives. And I think that's something that kind of elevates them as students in their learning and their academic endeavors. The last one is the Confluence Project, and learning about seasonal rounds or the gathering of traditional foods throughout the year, and stewardship. And so, like the video I showed, stewardship of the land, not taking more than you need, leaving the land better than how you found it. And so taking one bulb and planting a dozen seeds. That's a great example of stewardship. Next slide. So again, it's really important to honor the perspectives that your students bring. So brainstorming the information of the cultural value and the theme, and recognize the different perspectives that your students bring. You may have, if you're in the city, you may have a really diverse, student population. I had the opportunity to work out at Beaverton and at a STEM school, and I was just amazed. I had all the 8th graders in the school. So I had 300 8th graders come through our classroom, and their perspectives, were very different from mine because they're 8th graders. And that's a whole other topic, youth perspectives on things. But that's what we need to be bringing and honoring in the classroom. And then they came from various cultural backgrounds. And some had just moved to the city. Some were from a small farm town prior. Some came from another city like Sacramento or San Diego. And so Portland was new. And just seeing that difference in cultures in urban settings. It's really interesting to learn from your students. And I think as educators, a lot of us will say that's the most rewarding part, is learning from our students and seeing our students succeed. But in our brainstorm, I always ask the questions. I'm pretty informal, I guess, with my students. You know, they are really comfortable with me and telling me what they really think, for good or bad. And so I ask them, you know, what is respect? What types of things do we respect? Who do you think of when you hear respect? When is respect important? When do we see respect? And why do we have, give, or expect respect? And asking these questions, you know, it's not all the who, what, where, why. There's a lot more to it. But having kind of a bank of these questions to help get the students really thinking about respect in its entirety is really helpful and guides them to consider. Some tips for the brainstorming. Here you can see in the picture, this is a congress, a youth congress that we have 100 students at. And this is only half of them at the boards right now, giving us their ideas on sticky notes or note cards. And they come up to the board and just, we give them a big question or ask them something, and they come up and put their answers. And that's so everybody's voice can be heard. Everybody's voice is valued. In a classroom setting, if you have a small class, like I have a maximum of 10 students in my college classes, it's easy enough for them to raise their hand and take turns, and they're adults. But you know, maybe that's something to consider. And there's a whole internet full of brainstorming ideas and how to do that in your classroom. But I really like this model in particular, because I have found that maybe sometimes they don't want to stand up and say their idea, but they have no problem writing it and putting it into the bucket or putting it on the board with everybody else's. So that's one way that we've done it in the past. And again, this will be available so you can utilize those questions there. Next slide. So here's an example of what my summer students came up with for healing, and treatment was our topic. And so healing, sage, traditional songs, so that they're thinking of healing as a cultural value. What does healing mean to you? How do you see healing? Recovery, longhouse. Healing is something to get over something. That's what it means. Or the jingle dress dance is healing. There's traditional healing and spiritual healing, which may not be something you think about, especially when you're talking with medical students. Spiritual healing was not on their radar until they started working with these students and understanding, oh wow, we're not just taking care of this human, we're taking care of the spirit as well. And so it's really helped transform the medical students on as part of the mentoring program. And then braces, I always like that one. Braces, casts, and crutches has always been something that caught my eye on this picture. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm really grateful one of the students brought that forward, because I've been in all three. I've been in braces, casts, and crutches, and it is a really important part of the healing process. And for them to identify that as an educator, it wasn't something I thought of, but for them to bring that forward is something that we honored as a class. And then for treatment down there, they brainstormed, because that was the topic or theme of the day, some ideas of what they thought that meant. For the healing definition, this is something I found on a website. And I'm just going to put a disclaimer out. It does take some time and energy to find information that I thought was credible, I guess maybe is the word, that I trusted and that I felt was authentic, coming from an Indigenous perspective. And so that's just kind of something to think about. You know, Google has all sorts of algorithms to give you information, and sometimes it's not what you're looking for. So be patient in finding what you are looking for. And that might mean going to a website and being like, oh, definitely not this, and going back and finding some more information. But for healing, from an Indigenous holistic perspective, the whole medical system that encompasses a range of holistic treatments used by Indigenous healers from multitude of acute and chronic conditions or to promote health and well-being. The process involves the patient, the family, the community, and the environment. And so I really liked that definition of healing because it was relevant to the students I was working with, because we had just had a week on environmental impacts on our health. So I try and find things that are most relevant and encompassing for our class. Go ahead and go to the next one. Next, provide a definition. Respect, so you can find all sorts of definitions online. I have the Google dictionary definition, and then a couple Merriam-Webster. Again, it takes time to go through and read and see what's exactly what you're looking for. What I found really interesting is if you see the timeline there, this is something Google popped up, but it was use of the term that you searched over time. And so in the early 1800s, there was more mentions of respect than in 2010. I mean, you can see a clear decline there. And I thought that was really interesting. That was something I just came across recently. And so that might be something to think about in your classroom. But I think as educators, that even more pushes this, the need for incorporating this into our classrooms. Like I fear a society that decreases in the use of the term respect. That's really concerning to me. So go ahead and go to the next slide. An explanation of the cultural values. So for respect, you can find various resources online. And again, I always look up Native American cultural values or Indigenous cultural values. I try and find, well, I start Nimiipuu. I start Nez Perce cultural values. Excuse me, and then I move kind of outwards. Northwest Native American cultural values, and then just Native American cultural values, and then Indigenous cultural values. So wherever you may be, I recommend finding the nearest Indigenous people that you are that are in your area to see if there's resources available. If you want to talk about place-based learning, that's a great place to start. Is with the Indigenous people of your area, and then start branching out. I know we do have folks from all over the states, so it's great to see that, and I think that's just some tips for all of us. So I'm not going to read these specific definitions, but I think having this beforehand, an explanation of the cultural values, whether it be from Native American perspective or not, having how you're going to describe the cultural value aside from the definition is really important. And your students can help build that. You can build this explanation, but I think as an educator, it's good for you to have a baseline of what you want them to take away. And so I put these both on here though, because it's respect and then respect for all things. So it has that environmental kind of background. And these are from the same resource, the Minnesota Department of Education, American Indian Values Curriculum. You can find that online as well. And I thought it was interesting that they had respect and then respect for all living things as two separate values. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I just wanted to play this video because some of you may be feeling like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can be the one to teach cultural values in my classroom. In this day and age, you can find almost anything online, and finding somebody who's going to talk about it on YouTube is not far-fetched. So this gal is from the Northwest, and I will just let the video play here.
When I think about the behaviors that humans have to go with sustainability, fundamentally it's about respect and honesty. It's about how much we appreciate all forms of life. And if in taking the life of a cedar root to make a basket, we are disrespectful and waste it and spoil it and don't make something of it useful and well made, we've disrespected the life we've taken. If we don't use all of the parts of the animal that's hunted, the hide and the horns, and we just take things for trophy or sport, then we're not doing things respectfully. We're not honoring the life that's been given to us when the elk died, or when the deer died, or whatever life we've taken. And so it seems to me that understanding sustainability is about the necessary balance required for survival, and it's for human behaviors, it's about honor and respect.
All right, so I see Leo is trying to get the video volume up
Sorry.
there.
Unfortunately, it kept bringing up the slide advance key, so I apologize if the volume wasn't high enough.
Can you go back to that slide though?
Yes. Let me see if I can turn, let me try to put it into, shoot, hold on. Let's open it in YouTube and see if we can at least turn on the closed captioning and maybe get the volume. There we go.
When I think about the behaviors that humans have to go with sustainability, fundamentally it's about respect and honor. It's about how much we appreciate all forms of life. And if in taking the life of a cedar root to make a basket, we are disrespectful and waste it and spoil it and don't make something of it that's useful and well made, we've disrespected the life we've taken. If we don't use all of the parts of the animal that's hunted, the hide and the horns, and we just take things for trophy or sport, then we're not doing things respectfully. We're not honoring the life that's been given to us when the elk died, or when the deer died, or whatever life we've taken. And so it seems to me that understanding sustainability is about the necessary balance required for survival, and it's for human behaviors, it's about honor and respect.
All right, so I hope that helped out a little bit. If not, you can find that video online by searching YouTube Respect and Honor Native Perspectives on Sustainability. And they have other videos as well. So again, there's plenty of resources out there if you don't feel confident in being the one to explain or to supplement. I'm more on the supplement. I'll explain it and then I'll have somebody else explain it. And sometimes I'll have a guest speaker come in and explain it just because I think it's that important. And I found it to be really impactful in our students. Go ahead and go to the next slide. After you do this kind of introduction and get them really thinking about it, give them something to reflect on their own cultural values. So again, you start with honoring their knowledge and then come back to honoring their knowledge. And so I always ask them, describe an instance you were respectful, describe an instance when you were respected, and how did these experiences make you feel? So up here on the top right is my little sister hugging my grandma, my grandpa's sister, and you know, showing respect to our elders. Here I am showing respect to a mule deer that gave its life for us to eat and then also make a hide. And so I wasn't wasting the hide, I was actually using it to make buckskin, which I gifted another grandmother. And then below here, my Pueblo dad, who adopted me down there, is gifting me with a blanket that he handcrafted and sewed. And so I definitely felt respected and honored in that moment. So these experiences make me feel loved and appreciated, and that my existence is important, and that I have some sort of meaning and purpose in life. And to me, that is something that nobody can ever take those moments away from me. So giving your students that time to reflect will really, again, help you, I think, build a relationship with them that they may not ever experience with any other educator, or might not have in the past. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So the next couple things to think about is emphasize how the cultural value is relevant throughout the lesson. Again, keep hitting it throughout so it's reiterated. It's not like this faint thought in the beginning and then you come back at the end and ask them, in an assessment, what about that cultural value in the beginning? Help them build this capacity throughout to communicate their understanding of it. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's a quick little story, and this is something I like to use, is traditional stories in the classroom, in the science classroom. It's called How Eel, or Lamprey, Lost His Bones. Once upon a time, there lived many different kinds of animals. One day, two of them, Eel, which is the picture at the top, and Sucker, the picture at the bottom, challenged each other to an ancient gambling game of sticks, which we call stick games. I'm an expert in the stick game, said Eel. You needn't look far to meet your match. I'm right here, said Sucker. Now we'll play. Don't let anyone bother us. Only the two of us will play the stick game. Then they played, Sucker on one side and Eel on the other. They played almost the whole night, and Sucker began to win the bets. In the end, Sucker defeated Eel. He won from him everything he had, and Eel even lost his scales. That's why Eel has no scales today. After Eel had lost everything, he told Sucker, I'm going to bunch up as many bones as I have in my body and bet them on another game. So Eel bet his bones and began gambling again. They continued playing, and by the time the sun was rising, Eel had lost all of his bones. This is why Eel has no bones or scales, because he lost them all to Sucker in the stick game. Thus, Eel is known to be slimy and boneless, while the Sucker has many bones and scales and is difficult to eat. This is also why the Sucker is a scavenger fish. He takes all that comes his way. And so I really, I use these traditional stories in my college classes as well. We all love them. And it's something we laugh and we reflect on, and we say, oh yeah, that was like that one time my cousin, on and on. And it's these stories have been told for centuries, and that's really beautiful to me. But when you're thinking, what's that got to do with assessment? So if you go to the next slide, here's some questions I asked my 8th graders that I had in Beaverton. How is this story relevant today? And their answers in complete sentences, but I shortened them. Because now lamprey eel do not have any bones or scales, while suckerfish have many. That's still true today. Because people lose lots of things to gambling. That's still relevant today. And because eel is still around today. And they had learned that eel or lamprey are older than the dinosaurs. And so I really, the one that surprised me was people lose lots of things to gambling. And that was something I hadn't expected from my students, but giving them the space to explain that and to reflect on their own knowledge was something I really thought was interesting. What is the cultural value in this story, and how is it demonstrated? So the cultural value we discussed was resiliency, or resilience. And so that's the first answer. Resiliency, because he tried again and again. Confidence, because both players were confident and ready to win. And perseverance, because it says how the scavenger fish takes all that comes his way. And so I thought that was really interesting. They didn't all take the, I don't want to say easy route by saying resilient, because they picked out different parts in the story of cultural values, different cultural values throughout the different parts of the story. And then the last one, what components of science are in the story? And so it tells you the anatomy of eels and suckers. It's the evolution, it talks about evolution and ecosystems, and it shows the differences in eel and sucker fish. And so these, this is really giving us as an educator a way to evaluate and assess their understanding of what was going on, what was being said, especially in terms of the cultural value. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll have Leah kind of click through these and kind of progressively, but these are examples of photo journals that my students did. So these are photos they took, and in their written portion, they talk about what did we do today from a science perspective, and how does that cultural value tie back into what we did in the classroom. So at the bottom here, it says protein is today's theme, and I feel like that was it feels like today. Okay. It was about learning and how plants work and how they need protein to grow. I can apply these themes I learned today or just what I learned today to my own life. Like how Dr. Ramos Diaz gave a speech about communicating with your partner and public speaking. So if you read the whole thing, it makes a little more sense. Go ahead and go to the next one. Red Road Lifestyle and Pathways Memorization. So in the top paragraph, they're talking about neurons and their structures. In the bottom paragraph, the cultural value Red Road was demonstrated with the skills of memorization today, because when you memorize the things you learn, you take that along with you on your journey to take back home, to teach to your family and your elders. This is your pathway in life, and you must take what you can to take back to teach others. And it's just, these are my high school students, and I know they're going to do great things because they're thinking about these things. They're thinking about the cultural values and how does that apply to science or whatever field they want to go into in the future. I know we're getting tight on time. Go ahead and go to the next one. Probably don't have time. But now I'll take some time for questions or comments if anybody wants. And don't forget to unmute yourself.
And while you do that, we have an evaluation. For those of you who are interested in a PDU, we ask you to fill out this form. So I'm gonna quickly grab it and put it in the chat so that you can also just click on it. Oops, sorry.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Assessment. How do you do assessment in your courses for the cultural part?
Yeah, so kind of like how does the cultural value relate back to what we learned in class? So I do that with my college students as well. So for whether they know it or not, they probably don't know yet. But part of their midterm is going to say, describe how 3 cultural values are related to what we've learned on arthropods, fish species, bird species. How do animal species demonstrate the cultural values you've selected? And so really asking them, how are these relevant to what we learned? Because I think once you kind of do the introduction and they are able to identify this cultural value in their own life, it's applying it and associating it with things outside of themselves and in an academic setting or in a societal setting. I think that kind of pushes the envelope to the next level of their critical thinking and understanding of these cultural values outside of themselves.
I see someone in the chat said they appreciate space and time for this conversation, and they feel like honoring students' agency is often missing from many of our science conversations. So,
yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that's something that we can really help foster. In our school, we are really big on building our students' cultural identity, and these are adults, and so sometimes a lot of them, it's hard for them to come and say, I don't know very much from a cultural perspective. I came to this school to, get a 4-year degree in science, but not understanding that, well, while you're here, you're also going to learn a lot about culture. And so I really appreciate working at Northwest Indian College and with my colleagues, because that's something we really try to foster in our students.
Anyone else have questions?
I was just wondering, are there opportunities to see, like, this just sounds amazing, and I would love to either see video of it in action, or if you ever host an open house?
I haven't thought about that yet. I do a lot of contract work, and so with my work in the summer with students, they're usually closed, camps for youth and counselors only. I have been recording some of my classes for students. I haven't thought about that. So I'm going to consider how I might be able to show this in action. But like a lot of things, it's kind of like a whole progression of actions and discussions, and sometimes a student will say something in class and there goes my curriculum, and that's all we talk about. So it's because a lot of my students, they have as adults, they are bringing something that they can teach us that I can't teach, especially in our community, like from different gender roles. So. But yes, I will definitely keep that in mind. I appreciate that.
Any other questions? I see comments appreciating the opportunity to use our cultures to see and honor each other. I thought even when you describe your background and your culture, I feel like for me and probably for others, we can find things we relate to, and that is powerful to think about.
Yeah, that's definitely something. I work in some groups that are about bringing together people who specifically don't get along in environmental recreation and conservation. Some are trying to improve the land and others want to just go on the land, and bringing together our collective thoughts for a collective impact, I think, is something in our classrooms we can focus on too. Is gets into a lot bigger things like systems thinking, but just honoring each other's all of our similarities and honoring our differences. But to make a difference, something we focus on is maximizing our similarities and minimizing our differences to move forward.
Oh, I see a question in the chat. Does your organization offer a list or samples of Native writings and stories that can be used to reference Native values?
So I did have another link available. Evergreen College has posted on a website Native American traditional values, I think, and that's a good synopsis. I have kind of a folder that I pulled from, and maybe we can upload that as well. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when those of you who fill out that exit survey, I can reach back out with a link to a resource folder.
Okay, cool.
We can include it in there. So,
cool. Yeah, I would love to share a lot of the resources that I use, especially when it comes to traditional stories and Native values. Because, like I said, I've spent hours reading things where I'm like, no, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I meant. And finding things that I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. So thanks for that. And I would be happy to share and save any and all educators the time that I've spent doing that.
And the lens of knowing that it's an authentic source.
Yeah, that too.
And I see people agreeing in the chat. They want to make sure they pick something that's authentic, and we know there's a lot of pitfalls there. So
yeah. Yep, that's another webcast for another day.
Yeah. I see a question, was it recorded? Yes, we are recording, and I will upload it to the OSTA website in the members section for members to access. And we have all of our, we also have another class that C gave at PSU a couple years ago that's there too. So those are available.
Oh, cool, the cultural ecology one?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm glad that's
I was trying to build the library because we didn't have anything yet, so.
good. I'm glad that's housed online somewhere still.
Yep.
So I know I have my copy of it and I'm like, okay, I got to cherish this copy.
Great. Well, I know it's getting late for some of us. This has been probably a long day, but I really appreciate so much that C was willing to come on her time to talk to us and to prepare all of this for us. So I just want to really recognize her and thank her for that.
Cool. Thanks, Leah. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Yeah, and thank you all for being here, and we'll be in touch. Look out for the next one. I'll be
Thank
letting
you.
you know what that is.